And we are on. So hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I hope everybody's doing fine and healthy. Today is May 17th of 2023. This is SIG API Machinery, bi-weekly meeting in open source Kubernetes. And we have a number of items in the agenda today, and we are going to go in order. And the first one belongs to Han and Marek. So why don't we start with that?
Sure. So we've actually discussed this before, but there is an implicit contract between Kubernetes and etcd. Marek and I have drafted a doc on the explicit expectations that Kubernetes has from etcd. And we want to codify this. We don't want to stop here at just a written documentation of what the contracts are between the two binaries. We want actual tests in a shared interface so that basically we can concretely be confident that we haven't broken any underlying assumptions that we might have of the underlying storage layer. Marek has, like, I think I had some code that I had shared with Steve at one point. And I think he was supposed to take that and do stuff with it, but I don't know what happened to that. And so I think Marek has been sort of following up on those threads. I think Marek might even have a demo of what this could look like. Marek?
Yeah. So following what Han said, can I share my screen? Is that okay? So, Fede, is that okay? Okay, thanks. So let me show, or yeah, just first to introduce myself. Can you see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Mark. I work on etcd. You may know me from emails like this. I don't know if this is readable, but yeah, I work on etcd, and I spend a lot of time on finding or announcing and finding all the latest data inconsistencies on etcd. So yeah, we had a lot of things to learn as a community, and one of those things was learning from our mistakes and like making inconsistency disappear. So one thing that I wrote is a new framework for testing etcd, which required us to re-evaluate all the API guarantees and watch APIs. And we test it by having model tests, which basically means we implemented an in-memory fake of, or something like fake of etcd that behaves like etcd, has the similar, not full, but similar API like etcd. It's in process, and we use it to compare behavior of etcd versus the intention. So if you can see, we have a couple of old history cases that we reproduced in the traffic, and we compare etcd versus the model, and we can get a nice graphs like this one, which is, I don't know if it's visible, but yeah, that shows inconsistency. So this brings me back to what Han said, is if we have a contract, if we have updated API guarantees, if etcd community focuses, or I am proposing for etcd community to focus on or prioritize implementing an etcd mod or Kubernetes traffic as defined here as a milestone, we can get a full etcd contract. So I took work that Han did, and that's, sorry if that's not super great, but Han basically defined an interface and has a publicly available storage on his fork storage interface thingy, and I took it, and if GitHub shows me, and I took the model that we have on etcd state, copied into Kubernetes code, implemented the same interface, and have it running. So it required to disable a lot of things on the testing, but most of the test work. To give you even more example of something more concrete, I have a full set of tests under API server package storage that, of course, there are couple of them that are removed. I didn't have time to fix them because this is a POC, but most of them run and pass. And that's all from like the demo that I wanted to show. If there are any comments or questions, I'm happy to share and discuss.
Thank you, Marek.
Yeah, I got it.
Yep. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I have a question. So that demo was neat. It appeared to show this is what Kubernetes uses, and this makes sure Kubernetes doesn't grow anything else. But I don't think I saw where it says this is where we make sure etcd doesn't break what Kube uses, which is the half I was expecting to see.
So I'm doing it on on the issue. I don't know if it's, I think Fede opened it. On the issue, I'm discussing that there is list of milestones that I slowly, and PR that slowly implement all the features that Kubernetes depends on, or add the traffic types and contract elements one by one, because it's pretty complicated contract, that grow our coverage of those tests. So we currently cover somewhat large parts. If you can, look at the issue, you should get an idea and read the PRs.
So I guess it's not clear from this doc. Is the goal to actually be sure that etcd doesn't break the contract, or is the goal to say this is the contract from Kube and we're pinning it, or any addition needs to be paired with something? Like I can see a lot of purpose behind we want to make sure etcd doesn't break what Kube uses. I see less purpose behind something that says we want to make sure Kube doesn't use anything else.
We are definitely not saying that. Yeah, we're definitely not saying that. We are definitely not saying that. We just want to ensure that etcd doesn't break Kate's expected behaviors.
And using this approach, we found cases where it broke. So we want to have, main benefits is, there was a request, I think Han mentioned, or previous discussion, when there was the ask about having an interface for testing of Kubernetes testing etcd, or testing against generic storage. This is one example of implementation of this interface that we are working on, and its implementation that should be easily to prove, to cross validate both projects.
I'm going to echo it back to see if I understand. So what you do is you take etcd, you create a model of it, and you want to validate that the model's accurate. So you take it over to Kubernetes, you swap it in, and if everything works, then the model's probably accurate, at least as much as Kubernetes cares about. And then that would then allow you to go back to etcd and use that model as a way of ensuring that etcd doesn't violate Kate's guarantees. And then also, if you expand that model in some other way, you can go back to Kubernetes and make sure you didn't break the model by checking it against Kubernetes. So that kind of the thought.
Yes. Yeah. Plus, this is a robustness test. So the model is just small part, because the main benefit is validating etcd, that etcd behaves like the model under any circumstances. So any injection at any storage failure, any network failure, and we are like drawing the list of those failures.
I mean, this seems like a really good way to test etcd. Especially I like the model-based approach, because the model, at least for those who haven't seen, Merrick had a really good talk at KubeCon about this. Can do a bunch of more subtle things around checking various like interleavings of operations that might not be expected but could happen in the real world. So that all makes a lot of sense to me. Is there anything that you expect to do on the Kubernetes side, or is it mostly just, test it against Kubernetes every once in a while, make sure it's working? Do you need a harness in the Kubernetes code base so you can do that more easily?
Han, I think you have more concrete ideas, or?
Say again?
Are there things that you need on the Kubernetes side for this? I mean, obviously you swap it in every once in a while to make sure that the model still works. Are there other things you want to do?
I would like to upstream this thing so that it's just there.
So for the uninitiated, what does that mean? Like this exists in a package, or does this mean like I replace the usage of an etcd client with a wrapper around an etcd client?
Yeah, there would be a wrapper, yes. So yes, there would be a wrapper, and we haven't completely worked out where we would store this interface, but ideally it would be some place that both etcd and Kubernetes could pull from. That way we could ensure that we are testing the correct intersection.
There is a
So it sounds like you want to enable like a certain kind of like test workflow. Is that right?
Yeah, basically,
like
yes.
There's basically some
Enabling
tests you
that
want to run
workflow
regularly.
would have the side effect of Kube no longer owns its own storage interface, right? Like so as a for instance, if this moved to a DEDS 2K repo, and everyone depended on that, and then Kube was like, hey, I want to use this new method, it would put whoever owns the repo in a position to say no. And like there is some concern over that. Where would you imagine this living?
Maybe Kate's details? Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, in a Kubernetes SIG repo, yeah, for sure. Like utils, so something that can be imported into both without dependencies. And that basically should mitigate your concerns about not owning the interface, right? Because it is actually owned.
To some degree. Yeah, I'd like to think about it.
Yeah, for sure.
The idea of having the interface defined makes a lot of sense. Being able to use that to test the behavior of etcd to be sure that it doesn't break the things that Kube relies on. Also very good. I have seen, I think I saw in 3.5, the test framework you're talking about, Merrick. It was awesome. It was the one that let me inject failure at this point, right? Yeah, that was awesome. Great work.
Yeah, and we found that like there was cases that we found that like there's at one edge case that we found that etcd broke the contract, and it was a very subtle bug on client side. I think it's already fixed and upstreamed on Kubernetes side too. Yeah.
Okay, so there is a couple of hands. I think Mike has been waiting first.
Okay, sure. Yeah, this is really interesting and great. I was wondering how you test interleavings. How do you control time to get the specified interleaving?
So this is more going into my talk from KubeCon. We don't depend on time. We validate linearizability, which means we use linear, like we execute some, we have some execution history from tests. during that test, there was some injection. So, but we have a history, and we can use this history to validate if the history is consistent with the model, and we don't depend on. I mean, we don't to the. We depend on linear usability checker to find an order to of operations. And if we have an order, I mean, if we have an order, we can, or linear usability checker will say this works if it finds at least one path of model that is correct, and it will reject if there is no possible path that model could take throughout all the possible execution order that if there is no path, the model or the history is not linearizable, and it means etcd is wrong. I can send you to like the talk, or I can send you to the documentation of etcd robustness tests that show exactly the a demo for this. Like it's
yeah. Could you please drop those pointers into the notes? I'll try to ask just one brief question in summary. Are you saying that what this does is it takes whatever happened and doesn't really take care to control what happened and says, was this a legitimate thing to do?
Yes, that's a good summary.
Okay, right. My question was a little different, which is, do you have the ability to make things happen in a challenging way? I gather no, right? So I'm going to suggest or ask, one of the things that you probably want to do is, one of the problems here, right, is there's concurrent stuff, and depending on the order in which things happen that are beyond your control, the code will react differently. And it would be good to be able to make tests that actually, reflect different impositions from the underlying reality.
So you're asking more about injection, not validation. So for injection, we have the dedicated library that allows us to remotely inject a fail points or arbitrary, let's say, semi-arbitrary code into etcd. So basically say, this is a fail point and we want etcd to panic when it hits it.
No, I'm talking about like injecting timing, right? If you've got concurrent activities.
We can add a sleep, or we can add some coordination. I mean, yes, you're talking about higher level or how to use this framework. We are trying to use the framework that etcd had. We already had this framework. We are just trying to grow it. I don't know if it can cover all the edge cases, I assume, like you described, but it should like, I'm open, and like, this is open. I can take any example, or we can create an issue and grow a list of ideas. I don't, it should be.
Okay, thank you. That's good enough for now.
Very good. Bogdan?
Yeah, hello. I also wanted to, I'm also working on etcd. I'm a little bit familiar with this work on the contract, but more familiar with the testing. Just want to give another way to summarize it. So I think the golden standard in this type of testing is Jepsen testing, if you're familiar with Jepsen.io. And I think this is actually taking this like a step further for etcd specifically. And the reasons first is there's the go fail injection library that, like what Mark said, that allows us to inject failures in more granular way than, let's say, Jepsen, because Jepsen is more like a black box. Here we actually can do more. And then this framework, it allows you basically mimic traffic, which is also great, and sort of write tests around that. And then on top of it, we do reusability validation through the library that is open source and pretty good. And then another thing Mark added was the watch validation. So we can like, because we're already injecting all the failures, right? We can do more in terms of validation. So it's not just linearizability. We can check other conditions, make sure that etcd specific primitives work as they expected. So I just want to point out that the contract, I think, is just, for me, how I see it, just like a summary of what happens in Kubernetes, so people can write tests and understand all the scenarios better. So just hopefully this was helpful. Thank you.
Very good. If you can lower the hand. So anybody else? So what's next here? I know, David, you need some time to think about this. Maybe, we bring it up again on the next meeting as a topic.
Sure. The implications of changing our storage interface are significant. And we had previously made a pretty explicit choice to choose to base it on etcd. And going back to the old doc about why we made that choice, thinking about it, deciding whether it's right to change that now, and the likely repercussions of that are all worth doing.
Could you help me find the link to that old doc and link it here in the notes for reference?
Sure. I think it was an old position paper we wrote.
Yes,
I'll
yes.
find it and link it in.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it would be really important that whatever testing happens isn't like Kubernetes development blocking, right? So if somehow Kubernetes changes in a way that works with the current etcd implementation, but the model isn't equipped for it, like I wouldn't expect a Kubernetes developer to have like their tests fail and be told, no, you can't do this because the model doesn't match what you do, even though de facto etcd does. Like I would expect that to show up. It's like a downstream, like etcd can look at this because maybe it's a problem with the model or something like that.
So
yeah, it gets complicated because once you give up the local control of your storage interface, you no longer have that as your storage interface. So you couldn't add a new feature. If you had to think about something like pagination support, you wouldn't be able to add it once you did this. And it would be a significant change. So yeah, I will find that old position paper fed and we should reread it and figure out whether we think it has aged well or whether it requires updates. And I think before we made any change here, we should make changes there.
That's great.
Yeah, sounds fair to me.
Very good. Should we move to the next one? Thank you, Marek and Han, for presenting here. Okay, Han, you are on the spotlight again.
Yeah, this is my other favorite topic. So basically, I have been looking at various implementations of open source sort of prescriptions on how to do control plane upgrades. And I've been kind of running around. I talked to SIG Cluster Lifecycle yesterday and brought this up, and they suggested I come here. So here I am. Basically, the way that we do upgrades with kubeadmin and CAPI, it occurs to me, is not ideal. So the way that the control plane upgrades from these like official in-tree for kubeadmin sort of mechanism for upgrading clusters basically involves upgrading a node at a time. And so what ends up happening is you end up with a skew of API servers, controller manager, scheduler, and you end up with a non-deterministic upgrade sequence, which to me doesn't seem ideal. And in our official documentation, it's actually quite fascinating. We prescribe that people use either kubeadmin or that they do a manual deployment. And the thing about the manual deployment is it seems more correct to me than the way kubeadmin and CAPI actually do upgrades, which is component by component. I don't necessarily agree with the order of the components. Like etcd should be basically order indifferent. And yeah, it's not clear to me that there is an ordering preference between controller manager and scheduler, but ideally you would want to update webhooks and then the API server and then either the controller manager or the scheduler. Does that make sense? I don't know if I've lost people.
I think what you're describing is that the way kubeadm does this is it goes to one node, it upgrades all the components on that node, and now you have node 1 that has a VN or latest version kube API server, latest version controller manager, latest version scheduler. But the position that you are in is that the other nodes are at n-1, meaning that lease acquisition can go back and forth between components, and that you haven't done a clean layering. You could, if you weren't using a localhost connection, have a new kube controller manager hit an old API server. Out of curiosity, for kubeadm, is it wired for localhost so they always hit the same one?
I believe so. I'd have to double check, but I think so.
I don't know if this is a good time to bring it up, but that point there around talking to localhost, is that a, sorry, Matt, I just saw you had your hand up. Is that like an actual recommendation that we make that things should talk to localhost too? Because we've definitely seen issues like you described where you end up with newer ones talking to older ones and whatnot.
It's definitely not a recommendation. Now, whether it should be or not is also somewhat contentious. I don't think it should be a recommendation. Hitting a not ready kube API server is potentially problematic. Disallowing unready connections is also problematic for different reasons. And you know that every kubelet is not going to use localhost. So there is an advantage to having a single entry point for all traffic that allows for consistency.
So my question is like, what is the prescription from API Machinery on the sequence of upgrades?
Oh, let's see what Mo's hand is first to make sure it wasn't I don't understand what this is.
All I was gonna say is, so unless they changed it, I would be surprised if kubeadm is doing localhost stuff, because there have been bugs in the past. Like I remember when we rolled out token request, it would, like, the kube controller manager would be like, oh, this API server doesn't support token requests, so I'll do the legacy behavior. And then like it would, because it would restart with, like, would get upgraded later. So like all the orderings were like kind of screwed up. But yeah, it was like explicitly upgrading components in a way that was not what we tell you to do. And having the side effects from it.
As I remember our recommendation, it is to update the QAPI server first before you update any nodes, before you update the controller manager, and before you update the scheduler. I agree that etcd should be order agnostic. And I also agree that the kube controller manager and kube scheduler ordering does not matter.
Probably. There's some, like, some of the controllers could feed into scheduler. So that's why I'm kind of on the fence about it.
So I can say that the way OpenShift does this is we have one component that goes first that updates basic configuration aspects, gets your CRD schemas right. If you need to handle a migration step, can migrate data control paths, it can update webhooks if needed. Then etcd and the QAPI server go in order and complete. And then we update the kube controller manager and kube scheduler in parallel, and they complete, and then we update everything else.
So you guys are basically doing it component by component, which makes sense. I think that that is like, I mean, it's a rational way to do it. You end up with better properties. I mean, like you kind of want to, you want to update all of the controller managers at the same time, kind of.
You get a choice between bringing them all down or rolling them out. And the advantage to bringing them all down is that you don't have a flap chance. You don't end up with
Yes, you have a flip-flop chance.
Going new. What we found previously that our biggest problem was that for a while we used localhost, and localhost didn't guarantee safety when hit by, say, a garbage collection controller for a not ready API server. And the properties of that were really, really bad when it failed. We also found that having a single entry point gave us sort of one thing to watch, where if the kube controller manager couldn't get there, we knew our kubelet's couldn't get there either. So it was just easier to watch for that.
So interestingly, UVIP probably solves that problem about localhost and the garbage controller.
I don't feel a little silly. What's UVIP?
That's the KEP we mentioned. I was about to bring this up too. That's the KEP we mentioned the other day, where the API servers proxy against each other.
It probably does improve that property quite a bit.
Yeah. So so that becomes less of a concern. But so then, given the fact that it seems like API Machinery stance on this is to go component by component as opposed to node by node, shouldn't we reflect that in the upgrade tooling that we provide people?
Does API Machinery own KubeADM?
No, I think it would be SIG cluster lifecycle, but they agree that component by component makes sense, but they felt like the call belonged to API Machinery of the correct sequence. And so once I finish here, I will go back and I will talk to them about what to do with KubeADM.
I think writing down the properties is valuable. Deciding about whether to bring all the kube controller managers down and then bring only new ones back up, that would be an interesting change. I don't think we make a recommendation on that one way or another. Don't know whether we should. Don't know whether I have an opinion on that.
I mean,
but if we do ask them to make a change, I think it's worth writing down both possibilities and explaining why we think one's better than the other. But
I mean, there's a lot of different ways we could go about doing stuff like this. I mean, like, I'm not prescribing a specific upgrade mechanism. I just want to make concrete the prescription.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this. There's what do we have to support for the ecosystem, given that people are doing this different ways. And then, like, what are we actually recommending, and like, what is the fine print about that? Like, because like, if you're talking to local posts, there are definitely corner cases that come up. If a controller manager flaps, that causes potentially certain things to happen. But I like the idea of like going through and updating this, especially after UVIP lands. Like, I don't think etcd should be in this list that we have in the manual deployments.
Yes, it doesn't.
I think with UVIP in place, you can pretty much say like, you should start updating your kube API servers, and then like everything else should go in parallel, and that should be fine because they'll talk to the newest versions of things. They'll be able to see everything. The garbage controllers will be able to see the old stuff and clear it out. But yeah, we should do an update on. I don't know how strongly we should recommend to other people what they need to do. I actually think it's maybe more of a benefit to people to make it clear what our constraints are, what we support, and like what we think is a pretty good, like, sane way to do it in a nature mode.
Should we even be prescribing KubeADM in its current form? Because I'm not sure if that actually makes sense to me.
I would have to look at it really carefully to see if we could recommend. If there's something that's really problematic, I think we either have to realize that that's happening and make sure that we support it, or we just have to like recommend a major change. But I'm kind of in the situation where I think like there's a lot of stuff going on in the ecosystem at some level, we
Yeah.
just kind of have a contract to support n-1 SKU of all our components.
I think I have one slightly stronger opinion, Joe. I think that if the configuration of a deployment or of a particular cluster installation is such that a new kube controller manager or a new scheduler could hit, or a new kubelet could hit an old kube API server, I think that cluster topology is broken. And I think that's a pretty clear statement. I don't know whether kubeADM is doing it. I'm not confident one way or another. I think that would be one where we would say that's a pretty serious bug. It needs to get addressed. One way to address it is to be sure that all kube API servers get updated first. And that is what I think, given that would be my preference for what we would direct people to do. If they make sure that, if a particular cluster makes sure that a kube controller manager, a kube scheduler, or a kubelet never hit an old kube API server, I don't think it's an urgent need to make a change. Pending some other failure mode I'm not anticipating on.
That is a fascinating, very strong statement. So wait, so you're saying it is actually incorrect for KCM to talk to an API server n-1?
I think that it is. I'm not confident that we guarantee that functions as desired.
Say,
I like that. I actually like that.
a newer controller manager is not allowed to talk to an older API server as per our versioning things. I've talked this with Jordan at length.
I like that.
We ran into problems doing exactly that on some of our internal clusters, and it's, yeah, definitely not supported. You need to upgrade the API server before any client.
I'm glad it's just not me falling short on reviews. When I review, I review it for compatibility with its current kube API server, not for compatibility with the previous one.
Yeah, and we have checks in like controller manager that make that assumption like implicitly, like, hey, is this API in discovery, thus I can use it? Well, that wouldn't make sense, because if you made that check once on startup and then the API server changes beneath you, you're kind of screwed.
We've also made use of new CSR fields, for instance, and CSR controllers in the same release that were introduced, based on the assumption kube API server always goes first. I think the only thing ahead of kube API server is hooks. If you need a hook that needs to get updated for compatibility with a new type, then that has to go first.
I feel like that statement should actually be in our upgrade documentation. like that statement should.
If Daniel and I failed to put it there, then he left me here as the only one remaining. Sorry, I mean, Joe's here too, but he and I thought many years ago wrote that. If we mess that up, let me know, Han.
It's I don't believe that's written in our upgrade documentation.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, Han, I also love just the other cleanup ideas you had, like make sure it's clear that etcd is independent, like for external things like webhooks, just say if they're independent, or say what the flow is. We should, just so people know like what to expect, I think is really handy.
I agree. I like those as well, but in terms of like that boundary, I think it is wrong if you have a new kube controller manager talk to an old server, and it needs to be updated. I
mean, the way that stuff is actually written in our upgrade documentation, it actually kind of suggests that we should be able to tolerate n-1, which is interesting.
We can tolerate an old kube controller manager talking to a new API server. So, but only in that direction, not in the other direction. As similar to, we can tolerate old kubelets against new API servers, but we cannot tolerate new kubelets against old API servers.
On that note, I don't know if we document specifically how many the version SKU supported between Kube Controller Manager and the API. So I know we do with Kubelet. I've assumed it's n-1 for Controller Manager. I don't know if we make that clear either.
You are correct. It is n-1. I'm pretty sure we wrote it down.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go. It is in the SKU policy.
Yeah, I think the SKU policy covers this already.
Interesting.
Cool.
Well, then,
It's-
our implementation, our entry implementation is at odds with our SKU policy.
Okay.
Yeah,
sounds
all
like
the
it is.
components in the SKU policy say they must not be newer than the Kube API server.
Yeah.
We should actually fix our upgrade documentation. And also QADM, which is basically violating this property. And CAPI, I think, which also violates this property.
No, it is possible to go node by node and ensure that they do not talk to an API server that is not local to that node. And I don't know about QADM to know if that's what they do.
Well, if you're not communicating on localhost and you are going through a proxy, then
You're at risk, yes. Or local.
yeah, exactly, right? So and someone just mentioned that the localhost thing was likely removed from KubeADM. So that means the implication of that is that risk does exist in KubeADM upgrade sequence.
It's certainly worth checking.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, so we wrap this topic up for now. Thank you. I know Alex has been waiting eagerly. So Alex, your time to shine.
Awesome. Thanks, Fede. I would like to introduce a KEP today. If you can go to files changed and then just view the README so we can see the rendered markdown. Can you hit the 3 dots in the top right and hit view file in the top right?
Yes, sorry.
Cool. So yeah, I'm hoping to get the SIG to agree that this is a worthwhile thing to do and some feedback on the proposed solution, and hopefully have an alpha for 128. So yeah, this KEP solves 2 main issues. The first would be that it's difficult for users to add or change value validations in their CRD schemas. If they do so without incrementing their storage version, their controllers will break while trying to update CRDs that are, or CRs that are now invalid from the new validations. Or if they bump their storage version, that's just a huge cost to CRD authors. So they probably choose not to do that. So what this would mean is that CRDs are kind of in stasis. If someone wants to change a validation, they don't. If you are making a new CRD and you're thinking about adding a validations, you should also be thinking about how you can't change them in the future. So you should not add the validations in the first place. So this situation kind of just deters people from using this feature. The second reason is that on the Kubernetes API server side, we can't change how existing validations are handled or fix bugs, for example, with string formats, because it would break user workflows. So can we scroll down to the small example here? So this is an example of just to illustrate what happens to the user when they change a value validation in their CRD. So assume they have that first schema with 2 fields that are strings, my field and my other field, and they create a CR that includes an empty string for my field. Now they change my field to give it a minimum length of 2. And if they try to update the CR to add my other field without changing anything else, they get an error. This also would happen to controllers while updating the status field. And even more sadly, users of server-side apply who submit a patch with just the single field that doesn't relate to the one that is failing will still get that same error. So this KEP proposes a feature to try to avoid this by doing a post-processing step on the schema validation errors. Can you scroll down to design details? We'll just do a post-processing step on the schema validation errors, find all the fields that have errors associated with them and see if they changed from old to new. If they did not change from old to new, then we will convert the error into a warning. And if they did, if the value has changed that has an error associated, we continue to throw the error. There are some implementation complexities with making sure that this is a reliable list of field paths and that we can associate the old and new values. But in general, I think it's a feasible plan. And yeah, I would like to hear the SIG's thoughts on this.
Would this be supported with cell expressions as well?
As they currently are, yes. Cell expressions, the fields that you can refer to are limited to the field that you attach the expression to. So the field path that's reported by the error is going to be a strict superset of all the fields referred to by the expression. So we can do that comparison. There is a proposal to allow the user to set a custom field path to report the error on for the just for the user experience sake. We will have to consider that while implementing this to make sure that we get like the original like root field path that contains all the expressed fields.
Very glad to hear that.
Yeah, that was an interesting corner case of this one. But I think we can work out the details on that. I've been tracking this, so I'm generally in favor of it. I mean, the main user visible change will be that if you do break your CRD schema, you will still be able to change things that don't affect the fields that you broke. But I guess the only downside is that you might not notice what you broke quite as quick, but I still think you would notice it pretty quick. And if you were doing any testing, you should be able to detect it. And if you are using any tools to detect that you're breaking your schema, you wouldn't hit that in the first place. So I think it's pretty helpful.
Would there be a mechanism that someone could use to get the old behavior if they wanted to?
Right now, that would be limited to turning the feature flag off. But if that's something people want inside of the API server options, I'm sure we can add that in.
Maybe per
It's at least
CRD.
worth debating. The feature gate is going to go away, and it is not common for us to change behavior without a mechanism to use the old behavior we had. So I think it's worth considering. We can debate it on the cap, but overall, I'm in favor of this. Glad to see ratcheting validation go in.
Okay, so what's the next steps? So of course you want people to review this cap. Are you targeting the 128?
Yeah, I would like to have a basic alpha in for 128. So if people can review it and for this version, that'd be good.
Great.
That's good.
Great, thanks, Alex.
Thank you. And I think we have one more from Vince that is requesting attention to this PR. Okay, so probably this is for Joe, David, me. We can not do it in the meeting. We can take it offline, unless there is something I am missing. Yeah, I think we just didn't.
Yeah, just look at it.
Pay attention to this. Okay. Very good. We'll do these, Vince, when you see this recording. Okay, that's all. Anything else that I missed? It was a good meeting. I will upload the recording before the end of the day today, send it to the channel, put it in the document. Very good. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye.